Understanding the Shroud of Turin. What is the Shroud of Turin? The Shroud of Turin is an ancient cloth at least 2,000 years old. It measures 4.10 meters by 1.13 meters. There is sufficient scientific evidence and historical references to identify it with the burial shroud that wrapped the body of our Lord Jesus Christ. Historical references date back to the Gospels. No other archaeological object other than the Shroud of Oviedo has been subjected to as much scientific study and historical and reference research as the shroud. It is particularly interesting for doctors. Understand how fascinating this cloth is for a doctor, especially a pathologist, because an autopsy can be performed without the corpse. It's like a CSI study. Let's reconstruct the crime. A computer was ordered to analyze the locations of the Shroud of Turin where there was blood. And along with the obvious locations on the forehead, nape of the neck, back, right side, hands, arms, feet, and legs, it detected multiple micropoints of blood effusion on the face and body. This is called hematidrosis, and it is suffered by people who suffer from panic before undergoing gruesome deaths and torture. The capillaries under the skin rupture, and blood enters the pores where it mixes with sweat. A contusion injury so severe that it dislocated the nasal cartilage was displaced was also observed. Profuse blood spurted out, partly remaining in the mustache and beard. Jesus of Nazareth, 33 years old, a tall man, 1.80 m, slender with a long beard, wears a long tunic and cloak. He is kneeling before the Temple of Jerusalem. He is in a very large garden, full of olive trees and other trees. 3 of his disciples are sleeping nearby. He looks at them, wakes them up, orders them to pray, and returns to continue his prayer. He asks God to relieve him of this torment. His anguish is such that he sweats profusely, so much so that drops fall to the ground from his face, distorted by anguish. The drops are red, the sweat mixed with blood. Father, if you are willing, let this cup pass from me. But your will, not mine, be done. Before the Sanhedrin. Jesus is led away bound by a guard of Jewish soldiers from the Sanhedrin, the highest religious authority of the Jews of the 1st century AD. They light the way with the torches they carry many swords and clubs, but no one resists them. They arrive at a large courtyard within a walled property and enter through a large gate that closes behind the procession. There is a hall that can hold more than 100 people. Soldiers and curious onlookers have entered, and a bonfire is burning in a corner of the courtyard to keep warm. Many men and maids from the house are around. In an inner hall with decorative mosaic floors and many oil lamps. Doors and windows are closed with wooden shutters. The double door leading to the hall is open. The chief priests are seated. Jesus stands before them with guards at his side. After Jesus' response, one of the guards hit him with a stick so hard that he fell. When he stood up, his nose bled profusely. His cheekbone swelled quickly and was red, the blow not having time to turn purple. After the Sanhedrin's condemnation, all the guards spit in his face and beat him, first standing up with their fists and sticks, then kicked him to the ground. You can see the prominent eyebrows, they are bloody and swollen from the blows to his face. His upper lip appears to show teeth. There are 2 theories, that they are bruises from the blows, or that when the image formed, some bones and teeth were left imprinted, like an X-ray. There is another blow to his left cheek, the cheekbone is extremely swollen. The whipping. Exterior. Antonia Fortress, Jerusalem, barracks of the Roman legions under Pontius Pilate. 1st century Jesus stands in the courtyard of the Antonia Fortress, with a limestone floor, a bloody column in the center, and soldiers guarding him. Romans around. There are no Jews or witnesses other than the Roman guard. They strip Jesus of his cloak and tunic, hang him by his hands with his arms outstretched from a column. 2 soldiers whip him with the flagrum taxillatum. This whip has at least 2 leather bands with 2 lead balls joined together by a bridge, also made of lead, where the band is tied to the leather band and, in turn, tied to the handle of the whip. Each blow leaves the wound from the 2 lead balls that macerate the skin and sometimes break it, and in many cases, the wound from the leather cord that also hits and lacerates the skin remains. There is blood from many of the blows. They whip him until they tire. The sentence Pilate chose for Jesus was to be flogged, not crucified. And the Roman soldiers were sadistic toward him. There are more than 120 blows with the whip on the Holy Shroud. Microscopic studies have found remnants of skin and skeletal muscle on Jesus' back, torn off by the whip and then adhered to the linen cloth with the blood. Jesus has been whipped, unable to stand or walk. The soldiers put his clothes back on him, but the Roman mockery continues. They laugh at the Jew who, according to his accusers, wants to be king instead of Caesar. A soldier has woven a helmet that covers his entire head from thorny branches, and to secure this helmet of thorns, they tie it tightly to his head. Blood flows from many places on his skull, on his forehead, a three-shaped trickle remains as the flow of blood stops in the wrinkles caused by the pain. You see these drops of blood on his forehead and head, they are from the crown of thorns. There is no reference in historical records to any other man who was placed with a crown of thorns. But that's not all. Pilate condemns him again, this time to death by crucifixion. You can see the darker shoulders, here the lashes are more pronounced, suggesting he carried a great weight that severely injured his torn skin. Probably the patibulum cross. A small group of soldiers leads the three condemned men out of the Antonia fortress. The Antonia is a Romanesque building with 4 towers built with large calcareous stones from the nearby quarry. One of the towers is within the temple area. The gate, 4 meters high, is made of wide planks held to the wall by enormous metal fittings. It overlooks the valley of the Tyropaeon. It is actually a transit route for people, animals, and wagons within the city walls. It is located between 2 rocky protrusions, hence the name, valley. The condemned are tied to a long pole of approximately 140 to 150 centimeters called the patibulum. It is a wide piece of wood that has a notch the width of the stipes, vertical pole of the cross that is nailed at the place of executions. Both arms are extended and securely tied on the scaffold, and the condemned men are tied together from one end of the scaffold to the foot of the prisoner behind them. Jesus walks with great difficulty. The other prisoners have not been flogged until now, but they will be flogged like Jesus during the march. Jesus falls under the weight of the cross. They flog him to get him up. Since he cannot bear the weight of the cross, Simon of Cyrene is forced to carry Jesus' scaffold behind the condemned men. They leave through one of the north gates. They have reached the place of the crucifixion, Golgotha. This site is an abandoned quarry with a mound that is reached by a side road. There are the stipes. It is not very high, but it is visible from a distance, and it is close to a road where many people pass. On the mound, there's room for the crosses and for approximately 15 people. There are 4 soldiers, the centurion, and some guards. Look at the hands. On the left, you can see the nail hole is not in the palm but in the wrist. In 1932, the French pathologist Pierre Barbet crucified corpses and saw that the weight of the body tore the hand if it was nailed to the palm. Furthermore, the jets of blood run from the hand toward the elbow. Why? Because on the cross, the hands are higher than the elbows. Do you see the right hand? The thumbs on both hands are not visible because when the nails injure the median nerve, the thumb contracts and the index and middle fingers extend. But here we see the 4 fingers visible extended because the tendons of the palmar flexor muscles were also ruptured. This probably happened while hanging on the cross. On the left, it's the same, but less clearly visible. Now look at the feet. On the right foot, which was likely on the wood, there are 2 nail holes, and on the left, only 1. They probably nailed his right foot to the wood, then placed his left foot on top and nailed it again. Since they raised him, he can no longer breathe because his ribcage is pinned by his hyperextended arms and the weight of his body pulling down on his diaphragm. However, there are 2 things that cannot be seen on the Shroud of Turin, the degree of asphyxiation and dehydration, and the thirst he must have suffered. In fact, the only thing he complained of was thirst, and they gave him vinegar. The cause of death was asphyxiation, along with crush syndrome and hypovolemic shock, probably kidney and liver failure because he had high bilirubin levels. It is evident that he was a very strong man. His appearance according to the Shroud of Turin is that of a 1.8 m tall man, athletic, well-built, with no anatomical defects. Jesus cries from the cross, "It is finished." His lifeless head rests on his right arm and chest. Jesus' body hangs from the cross, cyanotic, eyes open, sclera yellow, and he is no longer breathing. A large amount of bronchial fluid and blood are coming out of his mouth and nose. The centurion approaches and, standing on the ground, pierces his chest with his lance from the anterior thoracic line. The tip of the lance enters the fifth intercostal space, which can be seen very high up due to the traction exerted by the arms nailed to the wood and which support the entire weight of the body. It exits on the back next to the inner edge of the scapula next to the spine. Profuse blood and a clear fluid of pulmonary edema are oozing out. Look at this wound, it is exactly the width and thickness of the Roman lances that have been found in archaeological excavations and under the ruins of Pompeii. There they also found whips like the flagrum taxillatum. Now, when they lowered the body from the cross and placed it horizontally, a lot of blood flowed out of the hole in the side. The blood no longer clotted, it had consumed many coagulation factors and was deposited on the back. Now the shroud tells us much more. For example, the bronchial secretions and the pleural and pericardial fluid from the spear wound are from a corpse, that is, the body was already dead when they came out of the body. Through spectrophotometric studies, we can determine which blood came out while the body was alive and which after death. And an extraordinary fact. Do you know why the blood on the shroud hasn't turned black like any other blood sample from a corpse? Because it has a high bilirubin content. This substance is a deep yellow color, and its presence indicates the state of multisystem failure. The liver was no longer able to complete the degradation of hemoglobin and myoglobin, which entered the circulation in large quantities. Having suffered so much damage to the skin and internal organs, she would have a large number of hematomas, which are collections of blood within the tissues, rich in hemoglobin. The muscle injuries would have released myoglobin. Both began to degrade, transforming into bilirubin and supposed to be excreted by the liver, but due to the state of shock, the liver couldn't complete its metabolism. She must have had kidney failure due to the degree of dehydration and loss of blood volume. She lost blood from the whipping, the nails, and the crown of thorns, not just the blood we see externally but beneath the skin in the muscles and internal organs, lungs, pleura and pericardium. Collections of blood and interstitial fluid formed because they were outside the blood vessels. They were useless to maintain blood pressure and life. She suffered severe respiratory failure. If she hadn't been able to support herself on the nail in her toes to breathe, she would have died sooner. In my opinion, she would meet the criteria for crush syndrome. This occurs when someone is trapped under rubble or underground, but can breathe without circulation in the limbs. The lack of oxygen destroys the tissues, causing large amounts of myoglobin and potassium to be released from the muscles when they are rescued and circulation to the damaged tissues is restarted. These substances are distributed throughout the body and cause death. Furthermore, the kidney in a state of shock shuts down its circulation to prevent further fluid loss through urine and thus maintain blood pressure. However, the toxins that cannot be eliminated poison the patient and they die from cardiac arrest. The shroud is a unique archaeological artifact. No other 2,000-year-old object has been subjected to so many scientific tests, and so far no test has been able to rule out that it is indeed the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth, and it is definitely the burial cloth of a crucified man. They say the carbon-14 test dated it between 1290 and 1360. False, it has since been discovered because carbon-14 dating is invalid. The sample was contaminated by bacteria, many hands touched the edges, it has carbon from the candles and incense it has been exposed to, and the place where they took the sample was patched with 14th century cotton. I don't understand why they refuse to accept its authenticity. I suppose it's because it belongs to Jesus. To begin with, it confirms the Gospels in detail, and if a piece of them is confirmed in such detail, it means the entire text is true. Keep in mind that, if the findings on the shroud allow us to perform an autopsy without a corpse, that's not the only astonishing thing. The biological samples haven't decomposed, they are the remains of a man who died 2,000 years ago. But the most astonishing and surprising finding is the image of the man. Blood marks are one thing, and the image of the man is another. It's unknown how it was imprinted. I have to admit that Jesus was the most influential Jew in history. All pagan beliefs disappeared from the world with Christianity, and he succeeded in establishing the will in many men to respect human rights regardless of origin, sex, or race. Precisely that brutal sacrifice on the cross gave him the moral authority to demand obedience from his followers to his commands. Unfortunately, they don't.
If you enjoyed our video, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. This channel isn't monetizable, but we need your support to keep making videos.